There are a lot of stories out there about lottery winners who go on to destroy their lives. Something like 70% of them supposedly go bankrupt within a few years. It's not hard to see how that would happen. When you give a lot of money and attention to a person who didn't earn any of it, that person doesn't suddenly change overnight. Instead, more often than not, all of their worst character traits are amplified 10 times over. And in many cases, that leads to a very public and humiliating collapse. This is a principle that doesn't just apply to individuals, it turns out. It applies to organizations too. Unearned fame and fortune are far more destructive than they might appear. And right now, there's no organization on the planet that proves this point more than the WNBA.
I'm just looking at some of the numbers here. When we talk about league attendance, the Indiana Fever, all right, with Caitlin Clark, led the league in attendance both home and on the road. Fever averaged 17,000, 35 at home, 15,000 on the road. Attendance for the entire league up nearly 50% this year, according to data from across the timeline. And Indiana leads all teams with an average attendance of, like I said,
the league just posted its highest average game viewership in 24 years. They're bringing in massive new sponsorships, at least by the league standard. They're selling out arenas, which used to be unheard of for the WNBA. And this should be a dream come true for everybody involved in the WNBA, from the executives to the players to the reporters who, for their sins in a past life, have been cursed with the job of covering a women's basketball league. Everyone should be overjoyed. But there's a big problem. All of this success, every bit of it, is due to the presence of one player in the league, and that is a generational talent named Caitlin Clark, who of course you've heard of, and still probably the only WNBA player whose name you know. She's the reason the WNBA just won the lottery. Without Caitlin Clark, nobody cares about any of these players or the league. With her, most people still don't care, but a lot more people care than did before, and everybody knows that, right? Therefore, everyone in the league other than Caitlin Clark is doing exactly what so many lottery winners do. They're allowing all of their worst personality traits to surface because they just can't help themselves. Several months ago, I covered the many cheap shots that Clark has had to deal with on the court. Some of these cheap shots look they look a lot like criminal assault, but of course they aren't prosecuted. Also talked about the many champions of diversity in the media who are strangely very unhappy about the diversity that Clark has brought to the WNBA, a league that is mostly made up of black players. There's been a lot of resentment in this league lately, in particular since the season began. And the thing about resentment, as we all know, is that it tends to fester over time. It gets worse and worse. That's exactly what we're seeing now, now that the season is winding down, the playoffs are underway. Over the past week or two, race hysteria in the WNBA has somehow reached yet another inflection point. The league is currently in the midst of what really might be the single most contrived racism scandal, certainly in any professional sport, at least since the fake noose in Bubba Wallace's garage. Specifically, a bunch of WNBA players have come out claiming that they've been victimized by racial slurs.
I think in my 11-year career, I've never experienced the racial comments from the Indiana Fever fan base. We had her face on a serious matter that happened in this world, and it's unacceptable, honestly. And there's no place for it, and we've been professional throughout the whole entire thing, but I've never been called the things that I've been called on social media, and there's no place for it.
And I feel like we have allowed trolls in social media to frame the narrative of what the story is, and it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And we have to do a better job.
Something needs to be done, whether it's, them checking their fans or this league checking. There's no time for it anymore.
I don't go on social media for that reason. And it's protecting my peace, but I also realize that that's a privilege for me. And so I just encourage everybody to take a step back and think about if it's your sons or your daughters or your nieces or your nephews or your children, for goodness sakes, because if my children were being harassed like this, I'm not sure what I would do. I'm not sure what I would do.
Like, a lot of players are claiming this. In other words, they're now accusing the people who have started showing up to WNBA games for the first time in more than 2 decades of being horrible racists. So now for the fine print. None of these racial slurs we're told about, some of which have supposedly occurred during games, none of them, as far as I'm aware, have actually been caught on camera. Interesting. There's no visual or audio evidence that might substantiate any of this. Not a single credible report, even. That's extremely unusual, obviously, given that there are cameras and smartphones at every WNBA game. You'd think that if a mob of racists were buying up WNBA tickets so they could heckle the players with racial slurs, as is being claimed, then the videos would be all over the internet. But those videos are not all over the internet. They're not anywhere on the internet. So instead, we have to take the player's word for it. Here is Brittany Griner, for example. Listen.
How do you feel about what has happened over the past year with the W since you first came in to where it is now? And obviously the game has grown and there's new fans, but how do you appreciate the new fans without all the noise that's come with them?
The new fans that sit there and yell racial slurs at myself, my teammates, and and the people that I play against. Because those might be opponents, but those are friends too. You know, they don't deserve that. So I don't appreciate the new fans. I think it's okay to do that. But I do appreciate the new fans that respect the game.
You know, the question that Brittany Griner was asked was about the massive growth of this league, which was dead in the water just a year ago and had been dead for its entire existence. And the reporter asked, what do you think of all the new fans? And like, in any other context, when someone says, what do you think of all the new fans that are coming in? Usually it's, oh, it's great. We love how everybody is supporting the league and we're so grateful. None of that. Instead of some gratitude, some appreciation for the people who have saved the WNBA, who pay to come out to see bad players like Brittany Griner, instead of that, we get resentment. Instead, we're told by Brittany Griner that the fans are racist. They buy tickets just so that they can yell racist things that are never captured on camera, because not only that, these racists happen to be magicians. They can shout racist things while also being completely invisible. And they can shout it at like a frequency that Brittany Griner can hear, but nobody else can.
Now, in response to those comments, the WNBA issued a statement saying the WNBA is a competitive league with some of the most elite athletes in the world. While we welcome a growing fan base, the WNBA will not tolerate racist, derogatory, or threatening comments made about players, teams, and anyone affiliated with the league. League security is actively monitoring threat-related activity and will work directly with teams and arenas to take appropriate measures to include involving law enforcement as necessary.
Hear the kind of dramatic, sad music in the background. This is really serious stuff. Law enforcement might have to get involved. WNBA games have become like Klan rallies, from what we're told. You're not going to see any of that on video or hear any of it, but just take their word for it. Take the WNBA's word for it. Take the media's word for it. Basically, they're complaining that too many white people are watching women's basketball now. And for her part, Caitlin Clark has basically gone along with this narrative, by the way. She made a statement denouncing all of the made-up racism, predictable. And one deranged sports podcast and self-pitying press conference at a time, that rubber band is about to break.